Captain Mark Tavish stood at the viewing deck of his starship, the Horizon, as it descended through the atmosphere of Draion. Below, the planet unfolded in a swirl of emerald-green forests, rolling hills, and jagged, alien mountain ranges. He had visited dozens of planets across the galaxy, but Draion felt different, alive in a way that he hadn't experienced before. The atmosphere had an almost tangible energy, as if the land itself was watching him. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Rico from the comms. "We're nearing the landing site. The Thalai delegation is waiting for us on the surface. Scanners show no signs of hostile activity." Mark nodded, tapping the comm unit on his wrist. "Understood. Prepare the shuttle. I'll meet you at the hangar." As he made his way through the ship's narrow corridors, his mind raced. The Thalai were a mystery, even to the Galactic Alliance. Isolated in their corner of the galaxy, they had long refused contact with any outside species. Stories circulated about them, rumors of their strange customs, their powerful spiritual connection to their planet, and their matriarchal society. But none of it was confirmed. This mission was the Alliance's first official diplomatic encounter, and as the lead negotiator, the success or failure of the mission rested squarely on his shoulders. By the time Mark reached the shuttle, his crew was already preparing for departure. Lieutenant Rico, a young but capable officer with jet-black hair and sharp eyes, approached him. "Any last-minute concerns, Captain?" she asked, securing her harness. Mark chuckled, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. "Just one. Let's hope their customs aren't as strange as the rumors suggest." The shuttle's engines hummed to life as they descended toward the planet's surface. From the viewport, Mark could see their destination, a vast, open clearing surrounded by ancient, towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. At the center of the clearing stood a group of figures, the Thalai. The shuttle touched down gently, and as the door slid open, Mark was hit by the scent of the forest, rich, earthy, and tinged with something sweet, almost floral. He and his crew stepped out, greeted by the sight of the Thalai delegation. The Thalai were taller than humans, their skin a deep shade of emerald, their eyes large and dark, reflecting the light like pools of ink. Their attire was simple yet elegant, made from woven fabrics that shimmered slightly, as if imbued with some unseen energy. At the front of the group stood the matriarch, a commanding figure with a regal air about her. Her long, silvery hair cascaded down her back, and her presence exuded both wisdom and authority. "Welcome, Captain Tavish of the Galactic Alliance," the matriarch said, her voice melodic yet firm. "We are honored to receive you on Draion." Mark stepped forward, bowing slightly, a gesture of respect he hoped would be understood. "Thank you, matriarch. It is an honor to be here. We come in peace, with hopes of forging a lasting friendship between our peoples." The matriarch studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing, as if she were assessing his very soul. After a tense pause, she nodded. "Your intentions are clear. But before any bonds can be formed, there is a custom that must be observed. A rite that every guest must fulfill to prove their worthiness to our tribe." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had expected diplomatic talks, discussions of trade, perhaps even some cultural exchanges. But a custom? A rite? His mind raced, trying to recall everything he knew about the Thalai's rituals. Nothing he'd studied had mentioned anything like this. "What sort of custom?" Mark asked cautiously. The matriarch's lips curved into a small smile, one that held both warmth and mystery. "You will be our guest of honor for the coming night's celebration. As is tradition, the guest must delight all the women of the tribe." Mark blinked, uncertain if he had heard her correctly. "I'm sorry, matriarch. Did you say delight all the women of the tribe?" "Yes," she replied, her tone still calm. "It is our way. When we receive a guest from beyond our world, it is customary that they bring joy to the women of the tribe. This has been our tradition for generations. To refuse would be seen as a grave insult to our people." Mark's throat went dry. Delight all the women of the tribe? What did that even mean? He glanced at Rico, who was standing behind him, her expression a mix of confusion and barely concealed amusement. Of course, Mark said, struggling to maintain his diplomatic composure. I would be honored to take part in your customs. However, I must admit, I'm unfamiliar with your ways. Could you elaborate on what exactly is expected of me? The matriarch's eyes twinkled, and she gestured toward the village behind her. All will become clear in time, Captain Tavish. Tonight, we celebrate under the twin suns. You will dine with us, dance with us, and share in the joy of the tribe. There are many ways to delight, and we shall see how you fare. With that, the matriarch turned and led her people toward the village, leaving Mark and his crew to exchange uncertain glances. Well, Rico muttered under her breath, this is going to be interesting. As they followed the Thalai into the heart of the village, Mark's mind raced with possibilities. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this custom than met the eye. The Thalai weren't a frivolous people. Everything they did had deeper meaning, rooted in their connection to the land and each other. Whatever this delighting entailed, it was a test of some kind, and failure was not an option. But the question remained, what, exactly, was he being tested on? The village of the Thalai was nestled within the towering trees, their thick branches forming a canopy that glowed softly under the twin suns' light. The Thalai lived in harmony with their surroundings, their homes blending seamlessly into the landscape, crafted from woven vines and organic materials that shimmered faintly with the energy of the planet itself. As dusk began to fall, the Thalai prepared for what they called the Feast of Stars, an ancient celebration held in honor of guests. Captain Mark Tavish followed the matriarch through the village, his steps heavy with anticipation. His crew, Lieutenant Rico and Ensign Marius, had been instructed to stay behind in the guest quarters, leaving Mark alone to face the mysterious custom that awaited him. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. He couldn't afford to make a cultural misstep, not when the success of this mission and future relations with the Thalai depended on it. The matriarch led him to the village square, a wide clearing in the heart of the settlement. As they arrived, Mark's eyes widened. The space was alive with light-glowing orbs floated above, casting a gentle, ethereal illumination over the scene. Around the perimeter, women of the tribe, adorned in flowing garments that glistened like the leaves of the trees, moved gracefully, preparing for the night's festivities. At the center of the square stood an enormous bonfire, its flames crackling with an unusual blue hue. It wasn't just fire, it was alive, pulsating with an energy that seemed to sync with the rhythms of the planet itself. The Thalai women danced around the flames, their movements fluid, almost hypnotic, as if they were one with the fire, the trees, and the very air they breathed. Mark found himself drawn into the spectacle. There was a sense of ancient power here, something primal yet deeply spiritual. He had heard stories about the Thalai's connection to their world, but seeing it with his own eyes, feeling it in the very air, was something else entirely. The matriarch gestured for Mark to sit at the head of a long table, carved from a single massive tree trunk. The Thalai women continued to dance, their laughter and song filling the air. Plates of exotic food, fruits, meats, and dishes unfamiliar to Mark were placed before him. The aromas were intoxicating, but there was something more to this feast than just the food and the ambience. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the true purpose of the celebration hadn't yet begun. Mark tried to mask his unease. "This is an incredible celebration, matriarch," he said, his voice respectful. "But I still don't quite understand what is expected of me tonight. You spoke of delighting the women of the tribe. What does that entail, exactly?" The matriarch, seated beside him, offered a mysterious smile. "You are our guest of honor, Captain Tavish. It is your role to bring joy to our people. Delight, in our culture, is not something that can be easily defined. It is a test of spirit, of connection. The ways in which you engage with our tribe will determine how you fulfill this ancient custom." Mark frowned slightly, his mind racing. He had expected diplomacy, negotiations, perhaps some cultural exchange, but nothing like this. The vagueness of her explanation only added to his anxiety. Suddenly, one of the women, a tall warrior named Riva, approached him. Her emerald skin shimmered in the firelight, her eyes reflecting the blue flames of the bonfire. She was a striking figure, her muscles defined, her presence commanding. She handed him a bowl filled with a liquid that seemed to glow softly, its surface rippling with an almost otherworldly sheen. "Drink," she said softly, her voice both soothing and authoritative. "This is the elixir of stars. It will open your mind to the spirits of our world." Mark hesitated, eyeing the shimmering liquid. He had no idea what the effects of this drink would be, but declining now might offend them, a mistake he couldn't afford to make. Steeling himself, he took the bowl and raised it to his lips. The liquid was cool and sweet, sliding down his throat with an almost electric sensation. Almost immediately, a warmth spread through his body, and his senses began to sharpen. The sounds of the forest around him became clearer, more vibrant, as if the trees themselves were whispering to him. Colors danced in the air, and the light from the floating orbs seemed to pulse in time with the beating of his heart. Riva smiled as she watched him drink. "You feel it now, don't you? The connection to Draion. Our planet is not just land and air, it is alive, and it speaks to those who are willing to listen." Mark nodded, though his mind was still swimming with the strange sensations. His vision had sharpened, and the women dancing around the fire now seemed to move in slow, graceful waves, their steps perfectly in sync with the rhythm of the planet. "You must join us, Captain," Riva continued. "To delight the tribe, you must become one with our celebration. Dance with us. Share in our joy." Mark blinked. Dance? He wasn't much of a dancer, and the idea of performing in front of the entire tribe filled him with dread. But the matriarch had made it clear, to refuse would be an insult, perhaps even a fatal one. He had no choice but to comply. Riva reached out a hand, and after a brief hesitation, Mark took it. She led him toward the bonfire, where the women of the tribe welcomed him with soft smiles and curious glances. The music around them grew louder, its rhythm thrumming through his body, resonating with the elixir coursing through his veins. At first, Mark felt awkward, out of place. His movements were stiff, uncertain, but the women guided him, their hands gentle, their laughter light. Slowly, his body began to relax, and he found himself moving in sync with the others, the rhythm of the dance seeping into his bones. The women circled him, their movements graceful and fluid, their eyes gleaming with approval as he became more attuned to their dance. It wasn't just about physical movement, there was a deeper connection at play. As he danced, Mark began to feel the emotions of the women around him, their joy, their excitement, their curiosity. It was as if the elixir had opened a door to their collective consciousness, allowing him to sense the subtle energies that flowed between them. The dance was more than a test of physical ability, it was a test of his willingness to connect, to immerse himself in their world. The women were not just observing his movements, they were observing his spirit, judging whether he was worthy of their trust, their acceptance. As the night wore on, Mark's steps became more confident, his movements more fluid. He was no longer a guest, awkward and unsure. He was a part of the tribe, moving with them, sharing in their joy. The women's laughter grew louder, their smiles wider, and Mark felt a surge of relief. He was succeeding. He was delighting them. Finally, after what felt like hours, the dance slowed, and the women gathered around him, their faces glowing with approval. The matriarch stepped forward, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. "You have delighted the eyes of the tribe, Captain Tavish," she said, her voice carrying a note of pride. "But this is only the beginning. The Feast of Stars is more than just a celebration of the body, it is a celebration of the spirit. Tomorrow, you will face the second trial, where you must delight our spirits as well." Mark nodded, exhausted but relieved. He had passed the first test, but the night was far from over. As the women dispersed, laughing and talking amongst themselves, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was yet to come. As he made his way back to his quarters, the effects of the elixir still buzzing in his mind, he couldn't help but wonder what the next trial would demand of him. The Thalai were a people of deep connection. He could feel it in every moment of the night's celebration. But what did it mean to delight their spirits? And how would he face the challenge that lay ahead? The dawn on Draian broke in soft hues of blue and green, the twin suns casting a surreal glow across the landscape. Captain Mark Tavish awoke in his quarters, his body still heavy from the night's celebration. The memories of the dance and the strange elixir lingered in his mind, but what stood out most was the matriarch's cryptic message: "You must delight our spirits." Whatever that meant, he would soon find out. As he dressed in his explorer's uniform, his mind raced with questions. What could the Thalai possibly mean by delighting their spirits? His experiences the previous night had been overwhelming enough. He had felt more connected to the Thalai women than he'd ever been to another culture. But this next trial seemed to imply something deeper, something spiritual. A soft chime echoed through his quarters, and the door slid open to reveal Riva, the warrior who had guided him through the previous evening. She stood tall and composed, her emerald skin shimmering faintly in the morning light. "Captain Tavish," she said, her voice calm but serious. "The matriarch requests your presence. The next phase of your initiation is about to begin." Mark nodded, steeling himself. "I'm ready. Lead the way." Riva turned, and Mark followed her through the village. The Thalai people were already awake, moving gracefully about their tasks. The village buzzed with a quiet, peaceful energy, as if the land itself hummed in harmony with the people. Mark couldn't help but feel a growing sense of awe for these people. Everything they did seemed to be in tune with their planet, a symbiotic relationship that ran deeper than any bond he had ever witnessed between a species and their homeworld. The matriarch waited for them at the edge of the forest, accompanied by a small group of Thalai women, each of them older and more solemn than the vibrant dancers of the previous night. They wore simple, earth-toned robes, and their faces were marked with intricate, swirling tattoos that seemed to pulse faintly with life. "Welcome, Captain Tavish," the matriarch said, her voice a serene contrast to the tension Mark felt building inside him. "You danced well with the tribe, and you showed respect to our customs. But now, you must face the next trial, the trial of the spirit." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "What does this trial involve?" The matriarch gestured toward the dense forest behind her, the towering trees seeming almost alive as their branches swayed gently in the morning breeze. "To delight our spirits, you must connect with Draian itself. The planet is more than just our home, it is our ancestor, our guide, our protector. Every living thing here is bound by the spirit of Draian. You must listen to its voice, and in doing so, prove that you are worthy of being one with our people." Mark's heart raced. He was an explorer, a man of science and reason, but disconnecting with the spirit of a planet was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Yet, he knew he couldn't refuse. The stakes were too high. "I'll do my best," Mark said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. The matriarch nodded approvingly. "Riva will guide you to the sacred grove. There, you will sit in solitude and listen to the voice of Draian. It may take hours, it may take days, but the spirits will speak to you if your heart is open." Mark swallowed hard. Days? He didn't have days. His crew was waiting for him on the ship, and the Galactic Alliance expected reports. But as he looked into the matriarch's deep, knowing eyes, he realized that time meant something different here. To rush this experience would be to fail, and failure was not an option. Riva gestured for him to follow, and together they ventured into the forest. The further they walked, the more the air around them seemed to hum with energy. The towering trees felt alive in ways Mark couldn't quite explain. There was an almost imperceptible vibration in the ground, a resonance that grew stronger as they approached their destination. After nearly an hour of walking, they arrived at a clearing deep within the forest. At its center was an ancient stone circle, partially overgrown with vines and moss, but clearly a sacred site. The air here was thick with a palpable energy, as if the very ground was watching him. "This is the heart of Draion," Riva said softly, her voice reverent. "Here, the voices of the planet are strongest. Sit in the center of the circle. Breathe deeply. Let the spirits of the land speak to you. Only when you hear them will you have completed the trial." Mark stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. He had faced countless dangerous situations in his time-rogue planets, hostile alien species, even near-death encounters, but nothing had prepared him for this. How could he possibly hear the voice of a planet? He sat down in the center of the circle, crossing his legs and closing his eyes. The air was still, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. He inhaled deeply, trying to calm his racing thoughts, to still the anxiety clawing at his mind. Time passed, though Mark couldn't say how long. Minutes, maybe hours. The sounds of the forest surrounded him, the soft chirping of alien birds, the distant whisper of the wind through the trees. And then, slowly, something changed. The sounds around him seemed to fade, replaced by a deep, resonant hum, as if the planet itself was vibrating beneath his feet. His breathing slowed, and the warmth from the elixir of stars from the previous night reignited in his veins. The hum grew louder, and Mark's senses sharpened. He could feel the pulse of the trees, the energy of the plants and creatures around him. But it wasn't just the forest, it was something deeper, something ancient. And then, he heard it. A voice, not in his ears, but in his mind. A whisper, like a soft breeze brushing against his consciousness. At first, it was indistinct, like the murmur of 1,000 voices all speaking at once. But as Mark focused, the whispers began to separate, each one telling a story. He heard the laughter of the children who had played in this forest for generations. He heard the songs of the Thalia women, passed down through centuries, their melodies carried on the wind. He felt the sorrow of ancient battles fought to protect their land, the pain of loss etched into the soil, and the joy of life renewed with each season. The voices were not just sounds, they were memories, emotions, the very essence of the planet itself. Draion wasn't just alive, it was sentient. It remembered. It felt. And it spoke to those who were willing to listen. Mark's heart pounded as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a test of patience or meditation. It was a test of connection, of empathy. The Thalia had lived in harmony with their planet because they could hear it, feel it, understand it. And now, through the trial, Mark was beginning to as well. A sudden rush of emotions washed over him, joy, fear, sorrow, and love, all woven together into a single, overwhelming sensation. He saw visions of the Thalia people through the ages, their bond with Draion growing stronger with each generation. He saw the matriarch in her youth, standing in this very spot, receiving the same wisdom from the planet. And he saw himself, an outsider, yet now a part of this ancient cycle. When Mark opened his eyes, hours had passed. The suns were lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. Riva stood nearby, watching him with an expression of quiet approval. "You heard them, didn't you?" she asked softly. Mark nodded, still reeling from the experience. "I did. It was unlike anything I've ever known." Riva smiled, a rare softness in her otherwise stoic demeanor. "You have connected with Draion. You have delighted the spirits of the land. The matriarch will be pleased." As they made their way back through the forest, Mark felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had passed the second trial. He had connected with the planet in a way he hadn't thought possible. But even as the weight of the experience began to sink in, he couldn't shake the feeling that the final challenge, the most difficult test, was still ahead. By the time Captain Mark Tavish returned to the village, the sun was beginning to set again, casting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and crimson. The experience at the heart of Draion still echoed in his mind, the voices of the planet whispering at the edge of his consciousness. His connection to the world was undeniable now. He could feel the life all around him, the trees, the wind, even the ground beneath his feet seemed alive in a way he had never noticed before. The Dalai had opened his eyes to something far beyond his previous understanding of life and culture. But as peaceful as he felt, Mark knew his journey wasn't over. There was one final trial ahead, the hardest yet, according to the matriarch. He couldn't shake the feeling that the true nature of this test was more personal than the others. The physical trial of the dance, the spiritual connection to the planet, those had been difficult in their own ways. But this last challenge, the one where he had to delight their hearts, would test him on an entirely different level. As he entered the village square, he saw the matriarch waiting for him, her expression unreadable, surrounded by the elder women of the tribe. Their faces were etched with wisdom, their eyes full of years of experience. There was no bonfire tonight, no music or dancing. Instead, the air was heavy with a quiet anticipation, a weight that settled over Mark as he approached. "Captain Tavish," the matriarch began, her voice calm but carrying an edge of seriousness, "you have completed the trials of the body and the spirit. You have shown respect for our customs and connected with the heart of Draian. But the final test remains. You must now delight the hearts of our people. This is the most difficult challenge, for it requires you to understand us not just as a culture, but as individuals." Mark listened carefully, his body tensing slightly. He had learned much about the Dalai, but the thought of navigating their personal emotions, their desires, and their expectations was daunting. What could he possibly do to prove himself worthy of their hearts? The matriarch gestured for him to follow, leading him and the elders away from the square and into the heart of the village. They walked in silence, the weight of the moment thickening with each step. Finally, they arrived at a temple-like structure, one he hadn't seen before. It was carved into the side of a massive, ancient tree, the walls formed from living wood that pulsed faintly with the planet's energy. The entrance was flanked by two statues, both depicting female figures, strong, regal, and protective. "This is the Temple of Anara, the guardian of our people's hearts," the matriarch explained. "Only those who seek to understand the soul of the Dalai are brought here. Inside, you will find the final challenge. You must face the elders and prove that you not only respect our customs but also truly care for our people." Mark swallowed hard, a knot of apprehension forming in his stomach. Caring for them? Of course, he wanted to see peaceful relations between the Dalai and the Galactic Alliance, but what the matriarch was asking for felt deeply personal. He had already felt the Thalai's connection to their planet, had shared in their joy and spiritual energy, but this was about something more intimate. Could he convince them that he understood and respected them on an emotional level? The matriarch stepped aside, allowing Mark to enter the temple alone. As he stepped through the threshold, the air changed. It was cooler here, the light dim, filtered through the living wood that formed the structure. The temple was small and circular, with a raised platform at the center. Around it sat the elders, their faces calm but expectant, their eyes focused intently on him. Mark stood before them, unsure of what to say or do. There was no guidance, no instruction. Only silence. The weight of their gaze pressed down on him, and the realization hit him: this final test wasn't about him performing some task or completing a ritual. It was about something much deeper. They were waiting to see if he could speak from the heart. He took a deep breath, and then, finally, he spoke. "When I first arrived here," Mark began, his voice steady but soft, "I came with the intent of establishing a diplomatic relationship, of building a bridge between our worlds. I thought it would be simple just to learn your customs, show respect, and then leave with a treaty. But what I've learned here is so much more than that." The elders remained silent, their eyes never leaving him. "I've seen how connected you are to your world," he continued, "how every aspect of your lives is intertwined with Draian. Your people don't just live on this planet, you live with it. The land, the air, the trees, they're a part of you, just as much as you're a part of them. It's beautiful, and it's something I never truly understood until I experienced it myself." Mark paused, gathering his thoughts. He could still feel the hum of the planet beneath his feet, the gentle presence of the forest around him, as if the entire world was listening to his words. But what I've also come to understand, he said, his voice growing more sincere, is that this isn't just about connecting with the land. It's about connecting with you, the people. The Thalai aren't just defined by your customs or your rituals. You're defined by your bonds with each other, by the way you care for one another, the way you share joy and pain, the way you protect what you hold dear. He looked into the eyes of the elders, hoping they could see the honesty in his words. I came here as an outsider, thinking I could just observe and respect your culture from a distance. But what I've learned is that to truly honor you, I have to be willing to care for you, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who genuinely wants to understand and support what makes your people who you are. The silence in the temple deepened, and for a moment, Mark feared he had failed. But then, one of the elders, a woman with deep-set eyes and silver hair, spoke. You speak from the heart, Captain Tavish, she said softly. You have seen beyond the surface of our customs. You have felt what it means to be the lie. Another elder, this one younger but no less wise, nodded. It is not easy for an outsider to understand what we value most, the bonds that tie us together. But you have shown humility, respect, and, most importantly, sincerity. The matriarch, who had entered the temple quietly during Mark's speech, stepped forward. Her face, so often composed and unreadable, now held a small but genuine smile. You have delighted our hearts, Captain, she said warmly. You have passed the final challenge. Relief washed over Mark like a wave, though it wasn't just relief from completing the trials. It was something deeper, a sense of accomplishment not for himself, but for having truly connected with these people in a way he hadn't thought possible. The bond you forged with us today, the matriarch continued, is more than just a diplomatic success. It is a promise. You understand now that our people are not separate from our land, from each other, or from those we welcome into our hearts. We are all connected. And now, Captain Tavish, you are connected to us as well. As Mark left the temple, flanked by the elders and the matriarch, he realized that this mission had transformed him. He had come to Draion as a diplomat, but he was leaving as something more, as someone who had been accepted, who had been trusted. The Thalai had taught him that diplomacy wasn't just about treaties and agreements. It was about empathy, about forging bonds of trust that went deeper than words on paper. The stars above twinkled brightly as he stepped into the cool night air, the weight of his journey lifting. He had passed the trials, yes, but more importantly, he had earned the respect and friendship of a people who had, for so long, remained isolated from the rest of the galaxy. As the village celebrated his success with soft music and quiet joy, Mark Tavish looked up at the sky, feeling at peace. This planet, its people, and their ancient customs had changed him. And in doing so, they had laid the foundation for a future of mutual respect, understanding, and peace between their world and his.